Starks, thank you for joining Dear Black Voter. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. Now, one of the biggest problems we have is that African Americans, we know we have tremendous political power. A lot of us are registered to vote in the city of Chicago, but when it comes time for elections, especially off-cycle elections, we don't show up.
True. Very true.
What's behind that?
Well, I don't know. I think traditionally in America, period, off-year elections, that is between presidential elections, the turnout nationally is low, but it's especially low amongst African Americans. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that people don't really understand the stakes that are up. I mean, for instance, in the county of Cook, we have some very serious races that people don't particularly understand the dimensions of. Most people know about the Cook County Board President, Preckwinkle, and she's up for re-election, and the county board members, but they don't really understand the fact that we have judges that are being elected. We have the, Cook County treasurer, all those, the sheriff, etc. And of course, there are many state legislators that are going to be elected and re-elected, state senators. The governor's primary is coming up soon. And all of these things are very important to the average African American, but we don't really understand the nature of what they do and the power that they have and the impact they have on ordinary African Americans, right?
Let's take it from the top then. There's been a lot of talk about Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle, namely because of the pop tax, from a lot of folks who didn't know much about Preckwinkle prior to the pop tax. So what does the Cook County Board President do, and what is under his or her responsibility?
Well, that's a very powerful position. Most people don't realize the real power that is in that office. She sits over all of the power of the county, and the county of Cook is the third largest county in the country. It has a budget of $5.4 billion, which is the budget of the county is larger than the budget of the city of Chicago. She sits over 5.5 million people in the county, and that includes about, I guess, several, the city of Chicago and several cities around. And, of course, she makes about $170,000 a year in salary. The county commissioners, she oversees them. She oversees the county hospital, the health services throughout the county, the sheriff's office, all of those crucial things that affect African Americans from the top all the way down.
Now, with the repeal of the beverage tax, 300 layoffs, and they're saying they're going to have to make some cuts to health services in the county. How did we get to the position where the budget constraints were so tight?
I don't understand that. I don't think anyone really understands that, because we thought that the budget was balanced and that we would not have any constraints. And so a lot of people were wondering, why did she have to go to the beverage tax in the first place, right? But after the beverage tax was defeated, now you have all the layoffs, and especially layoffs in the sheriff's department and the Cook County Circuit Court. And, of course, with the sheriff's office, the Cook County Jail is overcrowded. There has been some decreases in the number of people in the jails, but we need to decrease that even further. And to have 300 people laid off, you have people being laid off in the Cook County health system, the forest preserves. So it's going to be a very critical thing. Now, I don't know how you make that up. I don't think that there's any way to make it up, but it's going to impact negatively the entire county. And and especially African Americans, when you look at the health system and the jails and the courts.
So who's on the ballot for Cook County Board President? Who?
Well, Fioretti, former Alderman Fioretti, is the
former mayoral candidate.
And the former mayoral candidate who is running on the Democratic ticket against Tony Preckwinkle. I don't know who's running on the Republican side, but I think she will probably win. I really don't know if Mr. Fioretti can defeat her, but she will have, whoever wins, if she wins, she's got to go back now and redo the budget and see if she can live and have the people of Cook County live with those layoffs.
And years ago, Strozier actually lost his election to her, proposing, what was it, half a penny tax on sweetened beverages, and then it came full circle. So I guess the remnants of those budget constraints were seen way back when.
Yeah. So in fact, someone said to me that she is doing exactly what she won against Mr. Strozier, and of course Mr. Strozier hinted that he might run again, but then he backed up, and he's not going to run for anything. He said he was going to run for the water district, and then he said he might run against Ms. Preckwinkle. But, she beat him because he was putting up a tax. And now she wants to put up a tax. And so it's really crazy. But that's politics, particularly Chicago politics.
Yes, it is. Let's stay at the county level.
Okay.
Let's talk about the sheriff's office. That's up in 2018.
Yes.
March 20th.
Yes.
Who's on the ballot then, and what are the duties of the Cook County Sheriff?
Well, Cook County Sheriff his major duty is running the Cook County Jail, but he is supposed to take care of all those unincorporated areas in the county, because there are several areas in the county that are unincorporated. So he is, in effect, he runs the sheriff's office that police those areas, and he also is supposed to supplement any county areas that are not covered by the people in those areas. But his major job is looking over the Cook County Jail.
Now, what are unincorporated areas? What are some of those?
Well,
those smaller south suburbs?
Small south suburbs, some north suburban areas outside of Winnetka, Waukegan. Some of the areas around Harvey and Dixmoor, some of those areas around there, those are incorporated areas, but there are unincorporated areas inside the county. Mm-hmm.
And a big push right now for the Cook County Sheriff has been, Tom Dart has been to look at changing bail policies to address this overcrowding issue. Actually, Governor Rauner has talked about decreasing the prison population during his tenure as governor. How has the jail population affected finances in the county?
According to some reports, it has affected quite a bit, because it costs a lot of money to house people in jails and prisons. And especially when you have some people staying in Cook County Jail for 2 and 3 years before they go to court.
To even get bail.
To even get bail, right? Because some people can't afford bail, right? So we're grateful to Dr. Willie Wilson, who came forth and helped to put up bail for people. But I think very seriously that the Cook County Board and the state legislature will have to address the issue of bail this next session, to make sure that people don't have to go through this long bail process, in which a lot of people are homeless and jobless, and they can't afford bail, and therefore they, in effect, rot in jail for years in some cases. In fact, there was a case that someone said that there was one prisoner that stayed in Cook County Jail for almost 5 years. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. So I think voters should insist that the state legislature and the Cook County Board address this issue forthright as soon as the election is over.
And just to be clear, the Cook County Sheriff manages
Absolutely.
that system, but only the Cook County Board and state legislatures can change those policies
Precisely.
around. Okay.
Precisely. And the Cook County Board finances the jail system and the sheriff's office. Absolutely. And so what money he gets, his budget, he goes to the Cook County Board to get his budget. And he has some of his money has been cut back because of the budget shortfall.
Yeah. Let's talk about, so Tom Dart decided he's not going to run. Let's talk about who's on the ballot then for Cook County Sheriff.
I don't know at this point who that is because that person has been very, very quiet. He's not very out there for some reason. I don't know why. But you can bet that whoever it is someone who is supported by the 19th Ward, because the 19th Ward, of course, is where Mr. Madigan comes from, and that's where Dart comes from. So that area has pretty much dominated the sheriff's office for many, many years. So I don't think they want to give it up. So whoever the candidate is, that person is, whoever wins, I think will probably come from that whole district.
But see, this was so interesting about this primary season because I think politicians, of course, know how disengaged voters can be during this time. So the fact that he's been quiet and knows that he can just slide right in, he or she can slide right in at this point, is pretty interesting to me and pretty telling. What does it say about the political process that at this time, when you think it'd be most critical, a lot of candidates are kind of quiet for some of these offices that the public doesn't really engage with that closely?
Well, one of the reasons is that there's so many offices to vote for. Now, remember, you're going to be voting for congressmen, you're going to be voting for judges, you're going to be voting for state legislators, state senators, Cook County Board commissioners, as well as the Cook County Board president. So there are lots and lots of things that people have to vote for. So the ballot is extremely long. So some people get tired and they sort of pick the ones that they think are more important. And unfortunately, the ones that people think are least important are judges. And one of the reasons is, of course, is that judges are not very well known because we have a district system, and most people do not realize the judges in their district. So the judges who win most traditionally in Cook County are judges with Irish names, right? And those who are supported by the Democratic Party. But judges are extremely important to all people, but especially to African Americans, given the mass incarceration of African Americans, particularly young males. So it is extremely important that African American citizens research and find out who is running in their particular districts and who they can vote for, both countywide and district-wide, and vote for them, find out who they are, what their track record is, and why they should vote. And that's, of course, in the primary. And of course, when it comes to the November election, in most cases, there are no Republican opposition. So the person that you vote for, in some cases, in the primary, is in fact the winner of that judge seat.
We tend to
very
know
important.
We tend to know the least about judges. I was over here like chuckling to myself because I'm one of those people who, back before I knew about how to research, whose name I recognized, who I saw in my neighbor's lines, that's who I voted for.
And that's the way most people do. That's
So,
exactly right.
When we think about a judge, how do we even look at, what criteria are we looking for? I mean, do we have time? The average person might not have time to look through a person's voting record.
That's true.
Maybe we could leverage the Cook County Bar Association. I know they give their recommendations for judges.
True.
But what is the best and easiest way for the busy average voter to find out about those judges?
I think the Cook County Board would be one of the
Cook County Bar.
Cook County Bar, right? The Cook County Bar, and places like the Urban League, for instance, will do research, and they don't endorse people, but they do research on people going in. The other thing to do, of course, is to invite those persons in your district to your church, to with debates. To if you're a member of a club, have them come and sit and tell the people in your club, your group, what their philosophy is, how many people they have come in contact with. Because as you said, some people think they can just slip through the cracks without being tested. But you can't allow a judge who is extremely important to your community to go untested, unquestioned. You got to do the research. But it's for the average person, that can be a little difficult. So I guess you have to go to the Cook County Bar and ask them to do the research and give you some information on them. Mm-hmm.
And the Cook County Bar Association, African American organization of attorneys, and they pick different judges. They give them a grade based on their voting record, and they kind of recommend whether they don't endorse people specifically per se.
Not specifically. What they do is recommend. And in some cases, it's good. I mean, they do good research, but they don't go into real depth on those people. So, again, I think it'd be extremely important to have people invite the judges to their churches, to their civic organizations, to their even to their club, their leisure clubs or whatever, and have them sit down and talk to them about it. And I would especially ask young people, millennials, to do the same thing, because remember, those judges will be judging those millennials, particularly in traffic court and in when they come up for crime or whatever. They affect everybody's life, and if you go to traffic court, of course, as you know, they're just where African Americans on any given day will be anywhere from 70 to 80% of the people in traffic court. So even though you think that the traffic court is not a very important thing, it is extremely important, because they can take your license, they can put you in jail, they can make you pay a high fine. So you really should check out those judges very carefully.
One more thing on the judges piece. So, and this is a selfish question, because as I compile this information, it'll eventually be available on coldpodcast.com for people who want to look at the judges. But what are some things that I could look at in terms of red flags for a judge's voting record, et cetera? Because oftentimes you'll find out how judges voted in different situations with different cases, but you won't get the ins and outs and the specifics on different cases, right? So how can you really understand who a judge is and what their biases may be? What are some of the ways that we can dig a little deeper?
Well, we're talking about two different situations. One, people who are running to replace a sitting judge, okay, and secondly, those who are running for retention, right? And the ones for retention are the ones that you can do the best background on, because those are the people who are already sitting on the bench, and they have already sat over cases, and particularly those in criminal court. You want to make sure that they have not overlooked or allowed people who've been doing bad things to African Americans to continue to go. So, for instance, if there's a judge who's allowed policemen who've been brutalizing or murdering African American young people, you don't want to vote for that judge. So what you do is you go to the Cook County Board, the Chicago Bar Association also will have a record on them, And then, of course, you can go to Google them. But you have to do the research. And I think there are groups like the Cook County Bar and the Urban League and other NAACP will have records on people that have that are up for retention, as well as people who want to replace sitting judges or people who are challenging sitting judges. So yeah, I think you have to go through all of those civic organizations to find out. The League of Women Voters might also be a source to look for the background on judges.
Let's head over to County Assessor. What does the County Assessor do?
Oh my God, he's the person that assesses your property. And by assessing, he simply says, this particular property is worth X amount of dollars. Therefore, I am going to assess this amount of taxes on that particular property. And that can be really tricky because the best example, of course, is Trump Tower, which is, worth millions of dollars, right? And, of course, the tax assessor has given them a low assessment given the value of the property. And then secondly, you have people like Ed Burke, who is a lawyer who go to court, to the assessor, the appeals court, and appeal cases, because even if you have an assessment, you can go and appeal the assessment, right? So Alderman Burke makes millions of dollars every year going to the appeals court and getting the taxes appealed on many downtown corporate buildings and properties.
So what ends up happening, you got these multi-million-dollar buildings being undervalued, which means that the owners pay less property taxes.
And even after that, they get an even lower tax after they get a person like Mr. Burke, who goes into the appeals court and get them lowered even further. And that means poor people then don't have the advantage of that. And there was a couple of studies about 10 years ago that showed that African Americans, on average, got a higher assessment than whites throughout the county. And I think that's something Mr. Kagi, who is running against Mr. Barrios, is alleging some of that same thing happening as we speak.
How does County Assessor Barrios benefit from giving favors to people who already own these multi-million-dollar properties by lowering their assessment? What is his mix in all of this? Is it an oversight, or is there some way that he's benefiting from this?
He's benefiting by getting, some people have alleged that he gets kickbacks, right? But he also, of course, is he's a big man in the Cook County Democratic Party, and therefore he wields a great deal of power. He has a lot of his children and relatives on the payroll in the assessor's office. So he's getting favors, and some people allege that he is getting kickback money as a result of these low assessments for corporate clients.
Do you know much about his challenger?
His challenger has been endorsed by Congressman Davis from the West Side, Congressman Danny Davis. He seems to be fairly straightforward. He has attacked Mr. Barrios on the grounds of his practice of lowering taxes and lowering assessments on corporate buildings and properties. And so I think he may be a big challenge to Mr. Barrios, actually.
Let's go to one more. What's one more hotly contested position coming up in March on March 20th that we should be paying attention to? There's been a lot of talk about Dorothy Brown, been a lot of talk about Karen Yarbrough.
Yeah, Dorothy Brown. I mean, she has, for some reason, and I don't know what it is, but she seems to have magic. She's been attacked every time she's run, but she runs and wins. And I think one of the things is that she has the support of ministers throughout the city. I mean, she goes to churches, and she's a very friendly, outgoing person. So whoever is running against her is going to have a rough time winning against Miss Dorothy Brown. Now, there is some criticism of her because she has not digitized her office, and she has promised time and time again to do it. But it's very important that she does it because, her cases, the cases in her office, eventually go to court, and the backlog can be excruciating.
And we should say Dorothy Brown is the Cook County clerk.
That's right.
And what does the clerk do?
The clerk files all of the cases going to the courts, and she needs to make sure that they are digitized so that they're not. There's not this backlog of cases going to the courts.
And lastly, what is the Recorder of Deeds? What do they do? I had no idea how important that office was.
Oh, it's very important.
Until I began to help my parents with some things regarding their properties.
Yes.
What does the Recorder of Deeds do?
The Recorder of Deeds, and of course, the current recorder is Miss Yarbrough, who is a graduate of Northeastern Illinois University.
Full disclosure. We know who you're voting for.
Yeah. And the Recorder of Deeds records all of the deeds to property in the county. So you can go into her office and find out, where the property is, the dimensions of the property, how she can trace the property back to its origins, who owned it 10 years ago, 50 years ago, etc. Because everything is, all the deeds, all the records of the property are in her office. So that's the Recorder of Deeds. That's a very important office because, as you found out with your parents, that when you have sales of property, it's recorded. When someone passes on and the property is given to the relatives or whoever inheritance, that all of that goes through her office. All of those things go through her office.
And does she have a challenger on March 20th?
Yes, she does, but I'm not familiar with who that challenger is.
Well, we'll have that information and those resources on Call Podcast.
Now, let me just tell you, one of the proposals is to collapse that office, and because there's some people who say that is a superfluous office and it should be collapsed and put in the treasurer's office, and I don't know, but at any rate, it's a very important office. I
remember that push and consolidating the offices as a way to deal with this budget, to save money.
That's right.
But it could also hurt efficiency.
That's right.
And people who don't have the lawyers to go through some of this red tape usually come out on the losing end of this type of thing.
That is correct. Now, lastly, I think our audience should be very careful and look very closely at the governor's race also. Fortunately, most of the candidates have African-American lieutenant governors candidates. But I think if we have to be very careful to look at how each one of the candidates explain their positions on crime, on education, and industrial policy, which yields jobs, right? Those three areas. And, of course, I want to add one more, and that's affordable housing, because the state, of course, as well as the county, and the city impact on affordable housing in the city. So I think we have to be very careful and as to who we will support in the Democratic primary as well as in the general election for governor of the state of Illinois.
The main forerunners in the Democratic primary, J.B. Pritzker, billionaire, and Chris Kennedy.
Chris Kennedy, right, who has a name as well as money because he's a millionaire too. But he's not as rich as Mr. Pritzker. And of course, the Pritzker family is one of the richest families in the country. And J.B. is a member of that rich family. Never held office before. Kennedy never held office before. And Mr. Pritzker has spent quite a bit of money up to this point on commercials. So I think people are very familiar with him and less familiar with Mr. Kennedy because he has not had as many commercials out. But so I would urge people to look at both of them very carefully and decide which one you want to vote for.
Bob Starks is a professor of political science at Northeastern Illinois University, former director of the Harold Washington Institute for Research and Policy Studies, founding director of that institute, and a mentor and a good friend of mine. So thank you for talking to the Black Voter.
Thank you for inviting me.
I appreciate it.
Okay.